Fidel Castro, born on August 13, 1926, was a Cuban revolutionary that ruled from 1976 to 2008. He set up the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere after overthrowing Fulgencio Batista in 1959. He ruled for over 50 years until he handed power over to his brother Raul Castro in 2008. During his rule, he was able to increase literacy, stomp out racism, and improve the public health care in Cuba. Early in Castro's life, he became very passionate about social justice. He joined an expedition to try and overthrow dictator Rafael Trujillo. The expedition failed, but that didn't turn Castro away. Shortly after his return from the expedition, he joined an anti-communist political party. The party was founded to reform the corrupted government in Cuba. The leader of the group was presidential candidate Eduardo Chibas. Chibas was a Cuban politician that used radio broadcasts to show his political viewpoints. Castro looked up to Chibas as a leader, even though he lost the 1948 election. Chibas eventually shot himself during a live radio broadcast because he could not expose the wrongdoings of the communist government. In July of 1953, Castro's revolution began. He led 120 men on an attack on the Moncada army barracks in Santiago, Cuba. The attack failed and Castro was captured. He was sent to jail for 15 years, but was released early by Batista for amnesty reasons. After his release, he was sent to Mexico, where he met Ernesto Guevara. Castro plotted his return with Guevara, who was also a revolutionary. In the next year, Castro took 81 men on a yacht named the Granma across eastern Cuba. They were immediately ambushed by the government. Of the 81, only 18 escaped, including Castro, his brother, and Guevara. They fled deep into the Sierra Maestra mountains with hardly any resources. They started out with only 2 rifles, but began picking up recruits along their way. They gained more weapons and supplies by winning small battles against rural guard patrols. In 1958, Batista tried to put an end to Castro's revolution. He sent in a large offensive group, including Air Force bombers and naval units. Castro and his guerrilla army held their ground and launched a counterattack. Batista's government fell due to Castro's many successful military campaigns. After Batista fell, Castro went to Havana, where he was met with cheering crowds. He became the prime minister there. As prime minister, some of his followers tried to execute members of the old government, who were allegedly convicted of war crimes. Castro's rule began in 1960, where he nationalized businesses owned by the United States, including oil refineries, factories, and casinos. Because of this, the United States put a trade embargo on Cuba that still stands today. The next year, in April, the CIA trained around 1,400 Cuban exiles and sent them to the Bay of Pigs to try and overthrow Castro. The attack failed because the first wave of bombers missed their target and the airstrike was called off. Due to this defeat, over 100 of the survivors were killed, and a majority of the rest were captured. Castro freed the survivors in exchange of medical supplies and baby food. These items costed around $52 million. The pinnacle of Castro's relationship with the United States was the Cuban Missile Crisis. His relationship with the United States was already declining, and his relationship with the Soviet Union was increasing. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev didn't want another invasion from the U.S. on Cuba. He sent a few nuclear missiles to Cuba, which is only around 90 miles away from the Florida coast. Immediately after the discovery of these missiles, Kennedy demanded that they be removed from Castro's possession. After several days of pressure and stress in the United States, Khrushchev removed the missiles from Cuba. However, Khrushchev demanded that the United States agree not to invade Cuba. Though Castro seems to be pinned with several negative events, he was able to increase education and public health care. He opened 10,000 schools and increased the literacy of Cuba to 98%. With the new implemented health care, death rates decreased yearly to 11 people every 1,000. In the 1990s, Castro's health began to decline. He put his brother Raul Castro in power for a time being. Raul was only a temporary leader for several years until Castro handed full power to Raul in 2008. Castro was a revolutionary that sought change in Cuba. He saw a better future for his country. He eliminated racism, increased literacy to over 90%, and improved the health care of Cuba.